And so does that, when you look at that, is that what you define as authentic leadership?
Is being true and telling the truth. Absolutely. Authentic leader is actually understanding who you are and why you respond the way you do, and understanding your team and their responses so that you can be more effective as a leader. But underlining, you need self awareness.
And welcome back, listeners and viewers. It is wonderful to have you back with us on the Unbreakable Podcast Network. Today, I'm joined by business leader Jennifer Jensen. She is a co-founder, well, she's a founder and an author of a book called Developing Authentic Leaders. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Kait.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we were podcasting before the podcast, and it was like racking our brains. And it's been probably over 15 years since we saw each other.
Yeah, pretty close, if not longer.
Yeah, because we were at a big energy company together. And I think that was at the very beginning of my change career, well, the formal part of it. And you were there doing projects.
Yes, that was a long time ago. A lot has
Yeah.
happened since then.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. What's gone on? You wrote a book.
Yes, it's close to 30 years that I've had a progressive career in the corporate world. And so through that, did a lot of project management. But one of the crucial times for me happened about 5 years ago when I had spent, by that point, a year and a half trapped in leadership chaos and
Mm.
reporting to a hands-off director who provided no structure, a micromanager who would cut me off from all essential business contracts, and a lazy boss who took credit for my work while I protected my own team from the dysfunction swirling all around us. And just as I started questioning my own leadership identity, everything exploded. So new leadership swept in with massive egos. They would come in and be the smartest person in the room, meet with you beforehand, but take your answers and say them before you could say them. That kind of environment. And so there was even more toxic behaviors happening then. And so my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer
Oh, I'm
and given
sorry.
just months to live, and my world spun out of control at a breakneck speed. And so through that, I hit rock bottom because I was struggling with PTSD from the micromanagement and just functioning like a robot, and started to
Mm.
put up the whole shield and armor to protect myself. And because I just couldn't deal with everything that was going on. And I started to take the role of being the rock in the family, which then all of a sudden a close family member over the phone said to me, Jennifer, be careful not to become so disconnected that you lose sight of who you are and stop caring about the people around you.
Wow.
And those words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me both angry and deeply unsettled because I was being caring. I was the rock. I was supporting everybody else. And it felt like an unfair accusation. And like I wasn't caring for my family. But then it made me realize when I sat down and actually looked at myself and what I was doing, in order to handle everything efficiently, I had stopped seeing people around me as individuals with their own pain and needs. And I was bulldozing through situations,
Mm.
making decisions without considering that others needed time to process, to feel heard, and to be part of the journey rather than just the passenger in my plan. And so when I
Wow.
started to recognize that, it allowed me to change my responses. But then I also realized I was neglecting the most critical issue, and that was myself. And so I had to go through counseling to start to deal with this and start to come back out of where I was and get rid of that armor. And so through that process, I did that. But then also, friends started to see the Jen that they had loved and known before this and said, it's time to go write a book.
Wow. That's
And
a
so
lot.
that's where
That's
So
that's a
that's where the
lot to
book
go
has come
through.
from. It is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It just it sounds to me like the past 5 years have been just growth through chaos.
Totally. And then I decided to start a company 2 years ago, Authentic Leader, and that's even more chaos, but I'm loving it.
Yeah, being a business owner is it's a big lift. I was there for
Yeah.
about 15 years, and I am so happy on the other side of being an employee now. But once you've done it, it gives you clarity into how you actually test your own leadership skills.
Yes. And you become more self-aware.
Absolutely. Well, you have to be. And I think that when you're in the space of developing people and setting the tone for leadership, it is very easy for you to get into the rat race and the wheel. And sometimes for me, I've had to step back and say, okay, what is it that I'm teaching other people? And am I doing those things? Do you have moments like that?
Absolutely. All the time. And where I'm even questioning myself too, am I saying and doing the right things?
Mm. Yeah, that's that's one of the things my former business partner used to say to us is, that's why we have insurance. We are human, and not every day can be a good day. That being said, I think we come with decades of experience, and that experience is what sets us apart. And so, when you reflect back into the experiences of project management, let's say, and you think about some of the lessons that you learned there, the things that maybe you didn't like, or the things that you didn't appreciate about people that you were serving in those project spaces, how do you leverage that memory of the past to produce something really positive for the future?
So I love it, like reflecting back, because hindsight is always 2020. And so then it gives you the ability to go, what could I've done differently? And how could I've responded differently to get a different outcome?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And through that, there's a lot of experiences where in one case, I thought I had totally destroyed my career and the trust of a CIO when I went to him and we were going to have discussions about renewing my contract. And I said, I'm not renewing. And he's like, what do you mean you're not renewing? And I said, because you, I can't work under your leadership. You have no foundation. You have no vision, mission, and values. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where to take the team because things change halfway through. So I can't be effective at this working under you. So I am not renewing my contract. And he went back to the consulting firm and there was silence. And I'm like, okay, well, that bridge is burnt. I did a real
Yeah.
good number on that one. And went back to the consulting firm and they said, was Jen unprofessional or rude? And he's like, no. And they're like, so what's the problem? And he's like, there isn't. I've never had anybody tell me that to my face. And he goes,
Yeah.
do you think she'll come back? Because I need somebody on my team I trust, and I trust her.
Wow. And so when you look at that, is that what you define as authentic leadership?
Is being true and telling the truth. Absolutely. Authentic leader is actually understanding who you are and why you respond the way you do, and understanding your team and their responses so that you can be more effective as a leader. But underlining, you need self-awareness.
Insight is a really powerful tool as a leader, right? It's what keeps you rooted into something and allows you to have a little bit of humility. We just had a leader on a couple of weeks ago, Arnel Santos. That was one of his top 3 leadership tips was humility, emotional
Yeah,
intelligence, and humility.
absolutely. And it's that vulnerability where people go, oh, that's a weakness. But with humility and vulnerability, it actually humanizes you and makes
So
you more approachable.
Yeah. So how do you coach leaders? Because I think you're touching on 2 things that are very hard for some leaders, right? I mean, we just look at LinkedIn.
Yeah,
LinkedIn is a cesspool of everybody's highlight reel as a leader. Um, until Bell Let's Talk Day, and then everybody tells their vulnerable one story, and then we forget about that because we're not going to be vulnerable for the other 364 days of the year. So how do you grow and encourage vulnerability in a leader as well as the levels of insight that it takes to be able to build humility?
So first off, you've got to start baby steps. You can't do it all big bang. So my recommendation first off is start to do, like, I use a tool, Lumina Learning, Spark, to help assess the individual. They get a better understanding of who they are and what they're like at home, what they're like at work, and what they're like when they're stressed out, and how can we change and adapt some of those behaviors so that they can be more effective. And we do that same assessment on their team so that they can then understand their team as well. And as you do that, you're going to see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and also your hidden treasures that you don't know about, or your blind spots. And those are identified so that you can start to work on them. And then we can, once we understand all that, then we can look at the vulnerability piece, because now in your weaknesses, if you become argumentative and when you're stressed out, you can now get your team to hold you accountable to that and say, hey, this is one of my weaknesses, is I become argumentative. So when I start to do that, can you highlight that for me and tell me what I'm doing physically, like how I'm presenting myself, so that I understand why I'm doing that and what it looks like to you. That's where you can start pulling all the pieces together.
Have you ever had a leader that just wasn't in tune and was kind of being walked down this path, and they're being told they're going to work with you? Because I deal with that a lot. Like, I come into contact where organizations, I can think of one, it was building an operating model for trampoline company. They had 4 trampoline parks, and they had a whole bunch of different people who were all former, gosh, I think they were all former military, some branch of armed forces. And so they all came with a lot of different belief systems, a lot of different baggage. I mean, we're talking guys who had been in war. We had one guy who was 21 years in the Marines. He was a challenge. And so it almost felt like when they said, well, you're going to sit with Kait now. Kait's going to give you this executive coaching. To some degree, it felt like a punishment. I'm not good enough at what I do, and therefore I now need to work with this person who I don't know. So have you ever come across that, where it hasn't been a voluntary approach and somebody has come to you and they've said, okay, I've got this team of people. I need you to jump in there, and I just need you to make a difference?
Yeah, that's typically what happens. And so that's where you've got to kind of go, hey, this is a learning for each of you, and try and make it a win-win for them. And this isn't a reflection on you. This is to help you understand who you are so that you can be more effective. And I also like to ask the question, how many great or exceptional leaders have you had in your career? And the average answer, and Kait, you can give me your answer.
My answer, by phenomenal leaders, I've had probably about 4.
Which is very high compared to what I get. The average answer is 2.
Wow.
And so here in this group or team, if we're going to do this, don't you want to be exceptional leaders? Because so many of us haven't had that experience, but we want that experience. So here's an opportunity to be exceptional.
And it's a different kettle of fish when you're sitting and you're looking down the barrel of exceptionalism. And I think it's subjective to a degree. So how do you hammer that in?
It's actually easy to do. It's very easy to be in the top 3%, because so many people don't want to put in the effort.
Yeah. So how would somebody go about getting into the top 3% without giving away your trade secrets?
Most individuals, to get in the top 3%, are going to bring in a coach or an advisor to help them, because that's what they need, and they know they need that, and they're willing to invest in it. Organizations are willing to invest in it. And then through that is really understand you as an individual and what you believe in and why you believe it, and start to set up boundaries, and also be there for your team and start trusting your team. Because there is an insane number of individuals who micromanage their teams. I've never seen it more now than I have ever. It's insane how many are now.
I believe that. And it's interesting when I jump onto a client and, we started a new client a couple weeks ago and we're in a partnership with another firm and they are definitely micromanagers. And I said to the one partner that I work with, you need to make that go away because I'm not staff augmentation. I'm also, in my opinion, one of the best at what I do, and I don't need somebody looking over my shoulder to see if I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's. They came to us, right?
Yeah, and that's actually huge toxic culture if they have that.
Absolutely, big time. And so, talk a little bit about your book in terms of kind of what you cover in the book and what someone can expect to learn when they pick up a copy of this.
So this book is very different than any of the leadership books out there because it's all in bullet points. I didn't write paragraphs and paragraphs. This is bullet points for the busy leader. There's 52 topics, one for every week of the year if you wanted to do it. And they're all done the same way, key insights, guidance, and reflection so that you can do it as a team. You can do it as an individual, or you can do it with an accountability partner just to grow. And I cover a wide range of topics. And the first part of the book is about you as an individual. What are your priorities? What are your expectations? Then we move into what are some key qualities of an authentic leader that they need to have. And I talk about vulnerability, integrity, generosity, compassion. That's all in there. And then we go into communication, the different styles, and what needs to happen on teams. And then how to influence your team and motivate them. So building teams and what really gets them going. And then we go into what makes or breaks leaders that are little things. And that includes vision, mission, and values. If leaders don't have that for their teams, and it may seem redundant if your organization has it, but if you have it for your team that lines up to the organization, you're going to be way more successful.
I agree. That's actually one of the first things that I do with a lot of leaders is a values assessment. And the reason why I do that is because we know that when someone's values are being violated or are compromised, they're ineffective. And I have this one fellow, I tell this story in almost all of my workshops, and it was for a large merger, and they had this one guy, and he was a linchpin. If we didn't take care of him, we would have had a catastrophic issue with operational IT assets, so field facing like tools. And so it was trains, planes, and automobiles, flew through New York, should not have flown through New York, slept on a bench that night in JFK, flew into Georgia the next morning, and then drove to northern Florida because it was like that bad. And when we got down there, we got our badges, went through security, did all the things, and we ended up in the plant. And we're sitting with this guy on a field site. And he's an IT fella. And he looks at me and he says to me, I'm an old Mississippi boy, and I got a problem with people who don't have vision. And I thought, okay, I get it. And so I gave him his values assessment, and he did it. And for him, I mean, he was, his wife was a nurse, and she stayed home and homeschooled their boys. They went to church every Sunday, and, he was a scout leader and all these different things, right? So very, very wholesome, salt of the earth people. And so I come back to Canada, a couple months go by, and, reflecting back into his values assessment, family and faith were two of the top priorities for him. And so I get back and we're sitting on a call, and I get on a call and he goes, well, I don't think I can have a conversation with you today. And I said, why? He says, I'm distracted. And I said, what are you distracted about? He says, well, it's not about work, so I don't know that we can talk about it. And I said, well, I don't just coach this much of a person. We coach the whole person. Mm-hmm. And he goes, all right. He says, you ready for this? I said, hit me, man. I'm ready. And this is before Teams and video calls and all that stuff. So we're just voice calling. Yeah. And he goes, Kait, the Boy Scouts of America, they're letting girls in. And so then he says to me, he goes, now, I'm not a sexist because I wouldn't take business advice from a woman if I was. But what it was his values were violated because his boys That was the only place where they would go, and they would, burp and scratch and start fires to stay warm. And now the mindset was, now they're not just seeing little girls at church, they're going to see them when they're on camping trips. And now we're going to have moms there to make sure that we've got all this. And, so for him, it became this really big thing that it didn't need to become. And he just needed to be heard. But it was the values that were feeling compromised that were stopping him from feeling successful, right? So, I mean, those are very powerful things.
Very. And if you know them, then you can start to create those boundaries of what you're going to allow to cross or not cross. And some people are going to respect it and some aren't.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And I think the other thing too that we do in these coaching relationships is we teach people different ways to reinforce those boundaries, right? Because if I feel overwhelmed and I become volatile because I'm feeling overwhelmed, and then you keep overwhelming me, yeah, I can acknowledge it all day, but how does my behavior have to change in order to respond appropriately?
Yes. And it's not one size fits all. So that's why I always tell my clients, I'm not going to give you the same tools that I gave Bob over there and Sally over there. You need something specific for you.
Yeah. I find that actually I don't even have a coaching plan when I go to sit with somebody. It is, I have a toolkit that's 15 years deep, and I've got a lot of really great critical thinking skills. I can figure anything out. But at the end of the day, when we sit down to coach, I'm not giving you a patented toolkit. I'm sitting down and we're having a conversation, and I'm going to coach you in the moment, and I'm going to give you tools that you can use right now.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you a basis. Yeah, I'll give you a basis, but from there, it can go anywhere.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the industries that you're working in right now, where you're seeing improvement and opportunity kind of coming up where, maybe it's not as traditional, or maybe it's really traditional.
So it varies. I'm seeing more and more. What I find hilarious for me is golf courses are looking for support.
Interesting.
Because of their seasonal staff and how to deal with them effectively. I'm also seeing oil and gas. That's more traditional approach. And that one is slowly changing, but it's still very authoritative versus being open to a more empathetic and adaptable approach.
Yeah.
So it ranges.
Do you find one that you enjoy more, where maybe it's you get to be a little bit more creative with your strategies than others?
It depends on the individual, what it comes down to, or the team. If the team is willing to try things outside of their comfort zone, then it's way more fun, because you can try different techniques and see what works for them, versus if you always have to do the traditional approach and try and fit the mold. To me, that's not fun. And I prefer the small to medium sized organizations, because there's more room to be adaptable, and they do want to be more profitable. And so if they want that, then they're willing to look for innovative and creative ways to do that, especially entrepreneurial and small tech companies.
For sure. For sure. So do you find that there's one part of your book that gets used more than other areas of the book? Like there's, when we think about, I don't know, a transformational leader or somebody going through a transformation, like when you think about those bullet points that you've written out, are there certain sections that you go to more often than others?
That's a tough question, because it depends. Sometimes it changes depending on the clients too and what's happening. Like right now, there's a lot. I did a small piece on micromanagement, but that building the team. There's a lot on building the team and using those sections to really encourage the team building, because that's what's lacking when you're dealing with a toxic environment. But another client, it could be a totally different situation. But one thing that I'm finding, because there's a lot spread out over there, is we're having to have a lot more adaptable leaders, because we're dealing with gender diversity, neurodiversity, Generational diversity, 5 generations working in the industry.
There's actually 7 if you look at the micro generations, because if you and
Yeah.
you're hitting on something which is where I wanted to go next, which was the generations. I mean, when we look at it, we've got, in some cases, I did my H2S Alive last summer. There was an 83-year-old in there.
Yeah.
Like I was like, bro, retire. I don't want you dragging me out of a facility. I don't think you could. But you look at this and, I mean, we've got Gen Alpha who's coming into the workforce now. We have Gen Z, we have Millennial, we have Gen X, we have
Boomers.
We still have a little bit of the silent generation.
The silent generation.
And then not only that, but then what you have is you've got these 2 little bridge generations, which are very emotionally intelligent generations, I think. One is Gen Jones, which is a straddler. They have 1 foot in Boomer, 1 foot in Gen X. And then you have Zillennial, which is 1 foot in Gen X and 1 foot in Millennial. So it's really interesting when you look across the landscape, and that's actually been something that I've done a ton of work on in the past 2 years, is how do we help particularly our older Gen X understand and navigate? Because Gen X, I love them. All my siblings are Gen X. I'm Zillennial.
I'm Gen X.
Yep. But you know what? They are truly the FAFO generation. You are the FAFO generation. F around and find out, right?
Yep.
And even where I sit at the Zillennial, we drank from hoses. We were outside all the time. We didn't have technology until we were like 14. We were like, there were all of these different things where we had to be sustainable on our own and we had to be problem solvers. So when you're looking at the landscape of generational divides, what does that look like for you? Because I know what it's looking like for me in some of the industries that I'm working in. So I'm interested to hear your take on this.
So what I love about this, and that I'm starting to push and actually have a blog coming out next month on this, is how do we deal with that? And the biggest thing that I'm finding in the research that I'm looking into is reverse mentorship. And a lot of organizations are starting to take this on, where we get the younger generation helping the older generation understand technology and where their strengths are. And then also learning from the older generation so that you've got both happening. It's not just the older generation mentoring the younger anymore. It's reversed. We're starting to see more reversed mentorship, which I love.
It's cool. It's interesting when you look at the statistics. Gen Z has now outpaced the baby boomers. There are more Gen Z. They are the largest generation in society right now. And they are opinion formers. They are voters. They are my favorite generation. And it's not just because I have a Gen Z daughter, but I love them. They challenge the establishment. They challenge the status quo. They're creative. They're diverse. In a lot of cases, they're incredibly lazy. They're fearful. They are a little ball of tension a lot of the time. And all I see with that is opportunity, right? This is where
totally.
It was interesting because the demographics that are actually popping the hardest with Unbreakable right now with our content and, as we're looking towards publishing is Gen X females and Gen Z males and millennial males. Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting to see that diversity in our following.
Interesting, yeah, because I know, and where I like to coach, I know there's a lot of executive coaches out there. I like to actually coach the middle management because of the fact that they're the next generation.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite.
Well, and they're also your highest risk. When you look at middle management, particularly in a transformation or when you're looking at an organizational shift or, you look at a market demographic, look what's happening with ConocoPhillips. They just announced a 25% cut of their staff globally, right? Like that's terrifying. Could you imagine being a director or a manager or working in an accounting department or a legal department in that organization, right? We're seeing this in higher education across our country. We're seeing, layoffs at, institutions that are just next door to us in Saskatchewan. And you look at that and our directors and our managers are sitting in this middle layer of leadership. And you have 1 to 2, maybe 3, sometimes 4, depending on the complexity of an organization, groups pressuring down. And then you have this group of employees and individual contributors pressuring up. And then you have, depending on what kind of industry you're in, you have the pressure coming from other sides, right? And this speaks directly to the health of an organization, because the vice grip of your people becomes that much more harsh depending on how
Yeah.
healthy the whole ecosystem is. So
Yep.
that makes me think, though. So when you come into an organization, are you being brought in at an organizational level or a business unit level, or is it a bit of both?
Both. It happens at both. And sometimes it's just an individual because they aren't getting supported by the organization. So they want to invest in themselves and grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had that too, which is wonderful.
Totally. And I always tell everybody, invest in yourself. If your organization won't, do it for yourself, because you want to be the best leader that you can be. And it impacts your home life as well. So don't think this is just a work thing. This is everything.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's exactly it. I remember doing I don't even know which organization it was, but I did one of my Resilient Leader programs, and it was abbreviated for the group. And this guy was like, this change curve. And I was like, yeah. He goes, can I stick this on my fridge at home? He goes, I have a kid who's just going into junior high. I have another one who's going into to high school, and another one that's going into university. And I think we could all use this. And I was like, yes, like, share the good word. This is your collateral now. Go out and make sure your kids know what this means.
Yeah. And guess what? Every single one of us is a leader somewhere in some way.
Yeah, that's true.
And
It's
it
so
can be
true.
going for coffee with friends. You're still a leader. You may be the one that instigated the coffee date.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that I don't think that people, and that's one of the reasons, like with Unbreakable, from abandonment to abundance and the strength to lead. It's not even just about leadership in the formal sense, but it's how do I lead myself day to day?
Yeah.
How do I lead my family? How do I lead in my friend group and do those things? Because I think we have a gap sometimes. Like, I don't know about you, but the one conversation that drives me absolutely bananas in my off season is, what do you want for dinner? What do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? Don't answer a question with a question, man.
No. And there's this lack of being able to decide.
Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think part of it sometimes is, if you are in leadership and dealing with it, you get tired of making decisions. And so even for myself personally, I've eliminated some of the smallest decisions that I would have to make every day, so that, like, for instance, wearing the same earrings, so I don't have to think about it. Or I know some people have done the same suit every day, so they don't have to think about it. Because we're inundated with decisions all the time.
Yeah. Jay Shetty, actually, in his book, Think Like a Monk, that's one of the things that monks do, right? They lay their clothes out the night before. They don't have a very large wardrobe. Everything about how you live in that space and how you live your life is as simple as possible to remove any of that fatigue.
Totally. So it's interesting to watch that.
Please, go ahead. Yeah, it is. It's very interesting to watch those dynamics. So when you think about the leaders that you're supporting and working with right now, if there was one thing that you could impart to every single one of those leaders, day one, that would just take like that, what would it be?
Day one, start to evaluate yourself and watch yourself in different situations to see how you respond. And also at the same time, look at the responses from those individuals that you're dealing with to see how they're responding to you. Because that's going to give you a huge amount of insight into how effective you are.
Yeah. 56% of how we communicate is our body language. And I think that this is one of those areas that people don't pay nearly enough attention to. And I think it's because we're always on this instead of being present with people. And for those listeners who are just listening to audio, I'm holding my phone up, and we're distracted. We're a distracted society.
Well, even in boardrooms, we're distracted because everybody brings in their laptop or their phone. And at one point, at one organization I was working at and full time, I said, everybody put your phones down now. I can't deal with this anymore. You're not listening. You're not focused on what's being said. And I'm having to repeat myself several times because nobody's really paying attention. So
what was
let's
the response?
They're like, what? And I'm like, okay, so what did I just say? And they're like, I don't know. I wasn't listening. Right. Okay. So phones no longer allowed in this meeting room, and laptops, close them you're now focused on what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have a saying with some of my clients and even my internal team is be where your feet are, right? We're so preoccupied with having the next set of concert tickets, for being the first one to know a piece of information. Also, who cares? It doesn't matter. All of those different things that we get that immediate dopamine rush from, right? And it's just it's awful. I remember I did an offsite with an Indigenous team, and we brought in an elder, and she said to me, she goes, "No, we're not going to be so nice as to say be where your feet are." She said, "I'm going to tell them to put the effing phones down." And I said, "Okay, you can do that. I cannot." And actually, so what she did was she had the kitchen bring her a little bowl. And anytime someone was caught on their phone, they had to give her a toonie. And at the end of the couple of days that we were together, 3 or 4 days, she ended up giving it to the serving staff and the team that was taking care of us. But, and it was shameful, actually, how much was in the bowl. We ended up passing it around like a little collection plate, and we all just tossed a couple bucks in there anyhow. But I think it's those things. I'm not a real big fan of carrot and stick, right? Like, where you do this, I give you this, you do that, I beat you down. That's ineffective. That is management system 2.0, right? We're beyond that now. And even more so when you look at this generation, like you look at Gen Z, they don't care. They don't care. Because how many of them had their phones taken away when they were bad little boys and girls, or, little kids that weren't listening, right? That was the punishment.
Yeah.
I'm going to take your iPad, Actually, I had an incident with my daughter, and she said, "Well," I said, "Okay, well, what's the punishment going to be?" And she goes, "Oh, I guess you got to ground me for this." And I said, "Okay, how long are we grounding you for?" "Oh, God, at least 2 weeks." "Cool. Anything else?" "Oh, you should probably take my phone away." And I said, "No, because that's more of a punishment for me, because then I really can't see where you're at." I said, "But I'll tell you what I will do. I'm going to turn the nanny controls on at 8 p.m. so you can't do anything on that phone." Well, the world ended at that moment.
Yep.
Well, so Jen, as we kind of wind down a little bit here, if you were to leave one or two thoughts with our listeners, something that they could take away for their own self-improvement and their own growth, what would that be?
I think one of them is that the most powerful thing that an authentic leader offers is not flawless guidance, but the genuine courage to show up as themselves. And another thought is that authentic leadership isn't about perfection. It's about creating genuine human connection through honesty and transparency. Those are the two that I would leave.
I love that. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, if they want to network with you, if they want to ask questions, if they want to retain your services, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So you can reach out to me on my website at authenticleader.ca, or you can email me at authenticleader.ca, but also you can go on LinkedIn and I'm there as well.
Fantastic. And we'll go ahead and we'll include all of that in our show notes as well, so that people can just click on through to you. And can people get a copy of your book there? Where else can they find your book?
You can find it on Amazon or Indigo, all online. And if you go to my website, there's links to everything there as well. And also, if your listeners want more resources, I have free gifted resources on there as well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us. I think we would be remiss to suggest that we wait another 15 years to see each other again. So let's stay connected. Definitely. And let's keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. And it was great seeing you again, Kait. Love it.
Likewise. And listeners and viewers, remember, protect your peace, chase your growth, and remember, always stay unbreakable.